On Thursday, we will be having a PLC based around RTI and the new process that is going to be happening here at Hackberry Hill. One of the things that might be helpful so that we can use our time wisely is for you to get into your Acuity and take a look at some of your reports, starting to get a good handle on really where students scored, where they're at, and where to head. I'm going to walk you through a couple places to get started. The first is obviously under Reports, Roster Report, View Your Class Roster Report. The subject, we will be looking at both language arts and math, so it is up to you as far as which one you look at first. Hopefully you're looking at both of them. The assessment type is that predicative. I have access to everybody, so I'm going to go ahead and select a classroom, and I'm going to select Speechly's class because I have a feeling she won't mind. I'm going to look at reading. The assessment's already there, and I'm going to go ahead and get the report. One thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to know which kids are in which tiers. Looking at Miss Speechly's class, she's got 0 kids in Tier 1, 5% of her kids are in Tier 2, 71% are in Tier 3, and 24% are in Tier 4. That's going to be helpful to know for Thursday's meeting. It's also going to be helpful to look at the kids down below and see where their scores are at. From here, we're going to go ahead and look at a different report. I could click off to the side over here and go View Class Report, but I actually want to go to Assessment Reports off to the left-hand side, and you'll see why in just a minute. You're going to select your class assessment report. Subject, again, I'm going to look at Language Arts. Assessment type, again, is predicative. Class, I'm going to look at Speechly again. Notice that it pops up with standards to report by. It's going to be a good habit of yours to start looking at the standards according to the Colorado State Standards supplemental pieces. This is where you're going to want to be when you are using Acuity to set your individual and SMART goals, as well as how to match CCAP to what Acuity is doing. So make sure that it's CCSS supplement. I'm going to go ahead and get the report. Notice it has my tiers up top again, but it's giving me a little bit more information. It's giving me information about multiple choice items and that 89% of my kids were there, 82% constructive responses. Down below is where it's going to break up the various standards and then the prepared graduates. So standard 2 is reading for all purposes. How did her students do across the board? 3% were in Tier 2, 44% in Tier 3, 53% in Tier 4, with an average of 84% at that standard. When I look at the 3 standards that were addressed on Acuity A for Language Arts 4th grade, it looks like that Standard 2, Reading for All Purposes, might be where Mrs. Speechly would want to do a little bit of work, because the other 2, she's got 94% average and 93% average. The other thing to look at is that 2 of the standards addressed were 3rd grade standards. 1 was a 4th grade standard. So really we should be seeing a higher percentage of students with that average points pertained in the 3rd grade standard range. They learned that stuff last year. They should have it. The 4th grade, they should have pieces of it, but those are going to be pieces that are going to build throughout the year. So this is going to be an important report to really view and start to get to know. One thing that Mrs. Speechly might want to do is she might want to see, of the Reading for All Purposes, the prepared graduate of demonstrates comprehension of a variety of informal, literary, and persuasive texts, she's got 13% of her students in Tier 2. I want to find out who those 13 are. So I'm going to click on the 13%, and it's going to pop up and it's going to show me which kiddos were there, how many points they obtained, So out of a possible 8, they obtained 5. I can add an instruction for those kids right away, or I can go back to the report and say, I really want to see what was that question or those questions really asking. So if I go back, this time instead of clicking on the 13%, I'm going to click on the actual demonstrate comprehension of a variety and here's all of the questions that were asked tied to that standard. So I might want to dig a little deeper and find out really how was this question formed, what was there. I want to show the entire item. So it looks like this was tied to a poem. Typically poems are more difficult for students to comprehend and get through. And this poem is most likely about. So it's really looking at the main idea. It gives me the depth of knowledge, answer choice distribution. So depth of knowledge was a level 3, which is going to be supporting, especially in a GT classroom, of getting those kids into that depth of knowledge. But also when we start getting into our thinking maps and wanting kids to transfer things at a deeper level, this is that kind of thinking that we're wanting kids to go to. So once I kind of understand what kinds of questions they missed, I should be able to, I'm going to hide this item for a minute. I'm going to just go back. Uh-oh, it took me all the way out. Let me go back to my assessment reports really quick. Sorry about this. My apologies, something happened. I wasn't able to get back out of that question. Might be a little easier doing it on a laptop versus an iPad. So you're going to want to go through and do that for just about all the standards and really get a good idea of where those kids in Tier 1 and Tier 2 and what kinds of strategies and things can you implement in your guided reading lessons to move them, as well as looking at the Tier 3 and Tier 4 kids to continue to move them as well. The assign button off to the far right, without even getting in and looking at the kids, you can just assign and it will automatically assign instruction for those who need that practice and that skill. At the bottom it says additional skills covered. If I were to click there, it takes me into just some different things that weren't necessarily tied under those content or those standards. So just an additional place to go. There is one more report that I'd like to show you, and that's the item analysis report. Again, I'm going to look at classroom item analysis report, subject language arts, assessment type predicative, class continuous speechly, wanting the Common Core, and get report. I want you to notice how this report's a little bit different than the other one. This time it still shows the standard, but this time it's in gray. Evidence outcomes are listed below. The actual question that was tied to it is what's in blue on the left-hand side. Then looking at the right-hand side, it's telling me of the choices A, B, C, D, where most of the kids scored. So for identify a detail, 97% of her kids chose letter A, and letter A was correct. 94% chose letter A for question number 5, and that was the correct one. So when I go through and look, I might say, oh, under 2.1a, number 1, determine the main idea, 59% of her kids chose D. That was correct, but that also means that 38% of her class chose A. I might want to dig into that question and see why was there a higher percentage of kids who missed that question. I could also do that for, let's see here, if we continue to look through, looks like the rest of them, they were pretty well on. So again, that one just goes back to that main idea, and it could be tied to that poem that we had looked at that earlier one. So this just gives you a better idea of what answers kids were giving, was it the right one, and giving you a chance to look at the question itself and see, was it a vocabulary word that was tricking them up? Was it a big idea that was tricking them up? Is there a certain evidence outcome within a standard that is tricky for kids? That will help you in your guided reading groups, setting goals, and moving forward before Acuity B window hits. We will have time to look at all of these 3 reports at Thursday's PLC, but like I said, the more time you take looking at it before then, we can actually dig into deeper conversations and reflective conversations about the data at our actual PLCs. So use the time however you wish, but I hope that this video was helpful for you.